She scrubbed the marble floors of Ashenvale Palace on her knees, just like she had done every morning for 3 years. Her hands were raw. Her back ached. Her name was Alara, and to everyone inside those gilded walls, she was nothing. Not even a shadow. Not even worth a glance. But today was different. Today, the Duke of Ashenvale returned from war. He came through the palace gates on a black horse, his military coat dark with road dust, his jaw set like carved stone. Everyone scrambled to attention. Knights stood straighter. Nobles bowed lower. Even the head steward, a man who feared nothing, stepped back. Alara did not look up. She kept her eyes on the floor and moved her cloth in slow careful circles, the way she always did. She did not see him stop. She did not see him stare. She did not know that in the 3 seconds he stood above her, the most feared man in the kingdom had gone completely, dangerously still. His advisor leaned in. "Your Grace, shall we continue to the throne room?" The Duke did not answer immediately. He was looking at her hands. At the small scar along her left wrist. At the way she moved with a quiet precision that did not belong to someone who scrubbed floors. He finally spoke, his voice low and flat as iron. "Who is she?" "No one, my lord. Just a palace maid." The Duke said nothing more. He walked on. But that night, her name appeared on a private document that passed through only his hands. And by morning, everything about Alara's invisible life was about to end. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Like and share this video if you love royal romance stories. Let us begin. The Girl Who Did Not Exist. The Palace of Ashenvale had 47 rooms that Alara was permitted to clean and 1 corridor she was forbidden to enter. She had learned the rules on her first day 3 years ago, when the head housekeeper, Lady Dorn, had pulled her aside with the clinical efficiency of a woman who had processed hundreds of maids before her. She was given a gray uniform, a cap to keep her hair contained, a pair of soft-soled shoes so she would not be heard, and a list of expectations so long it had taken an entire evening to memorize. Be invisible. Be silent. Be useful. Be grateful. Alara had mastered all 4 without effort. She had been practicing them her entire life. She was the daughter of a seamstress from the lower village of Mirren, a woman who had died of fever when Alara was 12. Her father she had never known. She had no title, no connections, no family name worth mentioning. She had come to Ashenvale Palace on the recommendation of a kind church woman who had known her mother, and she had spent 3 years becoming exactly what she was hired to be. A ghost. She moved through the palace corridors before dawn, when even the torches were sleeping. She polished silver candlesticks and scrubbed limestone hearths and beat the heavy winter drapes against the stone courtyard walls until her arms trembled. She carried coal buckets up 4 flights of stairs and emptied ash bins and kept the fire grates in the noble guest chambers burning at precisely the temperature Lady Dorn required. She did not complain. She did not dream, at least not openly. But there were things about Alara that did not quite fit the shape of a palace maid. She read. Not the simple prayer texts that the church girls passed around, but heavy volumes from the restricted palace library that she borrowed without permission and returned before anyone noticed. Philosophy. Military history. Languages. She had taught herself 3 in the quiet hours before the palace woke. She had a memory that worked like a trap, catching everything it touched. She noticed things others missed, the slight lean of a picture frame that signaled a hidden passage, the pattern of the head steward's footsteps that told you when he was checking rooms, the way the kitchen maids looked when they were hiding something important. She had learned to carry all of this quietly and carefully, the way one carries fire cupped in both hands. She did not know that she had already been noticed. The Duke of Ashenvale had been gone 14 months. His name was Lord Caius Varon, and the kingdom's relationship with him was built entirely on fear. He was 32 years old. He had inherited the Duchy of Ashenvale at 19 after his father died in a hunting accident that most believed was not an accident at all. He had spent the years since building a military reputation that made the king's own generals speak quietly when they discussed him. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and moved with the contained energy of a man who had trained his body the way most men train horses, with patience, with discipline, and with the clear expectation of absolute obedience. His hair was dark, close-cropped at the sides and longer at the crown. His eyes were a gray so pale they appeared silver in certain light, and they had the unsettling quality of looking at you as though they had already catalogued everything interesting about you and found most of it wanting. He did not smile in public. He was not cruel without reason. But he was cold in a way that people mistook for cruelty, and he had never felt the need to correct them. He had returned from the northern campaign 3 days ahead of schedule, without announcement, because he preferred arriving before people had time to arrange their deceptions. He rode through the main palace gate as the morning cleaning shift was beginning, and the first thing he saw was a girl on her knees in the entrance hall, washing the floor with the kind of focused attention most people reserved for things that mattered. He had almost walked past. Almost. It was the scar that stopped him. Small, pale, crescent-shaped, along the inside of her left wrist. He had seen that shape before. Once. In a classified military document that should not have been accessible to a palace maid. He kept walking. But he filed her away in the part of his mind where he kept things that needed to be examined. That evening, he sent for the palace personnel records. He read through them carefully, the way he read everything. When he reached her file, he read it twice. Alara of Miran. Age 21. Origin, Lower Village District. Employed 3 years. Record, flawless. Notes from Lady Dorn, diligent, quiet, invisible, no cause for concern. There was nothing unusual about any of it. Which was, in his experience, the most unusual thing possible. Everyone had something irregular in their record. An absence. A reprimand. A connection to another member of staff. Elara had none of it. Her file was so clean it looked constructed. He set it down and looked out his window at the dark palace grounds. He did not believe in coincidence. He believed in pattern. And something about the girl on the floor formed the beginning of one. Elara did not find out until the following morning, when Lady Dorn appeared in the linen room where she was folding bed-sheets and told her in a carefully neutral voice that her duties had been reassigned. She was to serve the Duke's private wing. Alone. Every other maid had been removed from that rotation. Elara kept her face perfectly still. She had learned long ago that her face was the one thing she could control entirely, and she controlled it the way a soldier controls the line, without wavering. "Yes, my lady," she said. Lady Dorn studied her for a long moment. "The Duke is particular," she said finally. "He will not want conversation. He will not want you to be seen or heard unless he requires it. You are to maintain his chambers, his study anteroom, and the private corridor on the east wing. Nothing more. Understood?" Lady Dorn opened her mouth as if to say something else, then appeared to change her mind. She simply turned and left. Elara stood alone in the linen room with a sheet folded neatly in her hands and the quiet, certain knowledge that something in the shape of her life had just shifted. She could not have said how she knew. She simply did. She first entered his private study at 6 in the morning, when she knew from the schedule that he would be in his military briefing room 2 floors below. His chambers were larger than she had imagined and significantly less decorated. No ornamental weapons on the walls, no portraits, no tapestries of the kind the other noble rooms displayed with ostentatious pride. There were maps. Dozens of them, covering 3 of the 4 walls in carefully pinned layers. There were shelves of books, most of them heavily annotated in a hand she could see from across the room was precise and economical. There was a single large desk that held no personal effects whatsoever, only documents, an ink set, and a small oil lamp. No flowers. No decorative rugs beyond the functional one by the hearth. No mirrors. She began her work at the fireplace and moved through the room methodically, the way she always did. She was emptying the ash pan when she noticed the book on the corner of the desk. It was face down, which was something she had never seen him do with any book in the room based on the careful organization of his shelves. She looked at it longer than she should have, then looked away. She finished her work and left. She did not touch the book. She told herself she was not curious about it. She was, of course, entirely curious about it. She found out 3 days later, when he left it in precisely the same position, and she allowed herself one glance at the spine as she passed. It was a volume of Northern Border histories. A subject she had spent 4 months studying in the restricted library 2 years ago, for reasons she had never been able to fully explain to herself except that she had wanted to understand where the old bloodlines had gone. She stood very still for exactly 3 seconds. Then she went back to her work. Things a maid should not know. It happened on the 12th day. Elara was cleaning the east corridor, the long one with the high arched windows that let in the cold morning light in pale geometric squares. She had learned his schedule precisely, the way she had learned everything in this palace, through observation and careful recording. He was never in this corridor before 9. It was 8:52 when she heard his footsteps. She gathered her cloth and pail and moved to press herself into the alcove beside the third window, the way maids were trained to do when a noble approached unexpectedly. Disappear into the architecture. Become part of the wall. She was almost invisible when she heard him stop. He had seen her. She kept her eyes down. "You are early today," he said. His voice was exactly what she had expected from a man who chose his words with precision. Low. Unhurried. With no warmth in it but no particular coldness either. Simply efficient. "I apologize if I have disturbed you, my lord. I will return later." That was not a complaint. She was not sure how to respond to that, so she did not. A silence stretched between them, the kind that in her experience meant a person was deciding something. "The east corridor has a flaw in the limestone grout at the 9th panel," he said at last. "Do not use the corrosive solution Lady Dorn prescribes for the other corridors. It will accelerate the deterioration. Use plain water and the coarse cloth only." Elara looked up before she could stop herself. It was the first time she had looked directly at his face, and she understood immediately why people found him difficult to read. His expression was entirely neutral. Not warm, not cold, not curious, not dismissive. Just attentive, in the way of someone who has trained themselves to reveal nothing involuntarily. His eyes met hers. She held them for exactly one breath. She looked back down. "Yes, my lord. I had already switched to plain water on that section," she said. Another pause. When he spoke again, something in his tone had shifted by a degree she could not quite name. "Had you?" "Yes. The grout pattern told me the stone was porous. Corrosive solutions expand microfractures in porous limestone. I noticed it on my second day in this corridor." She stopped. She should not have said that. Not because it was wrong, but because it was too much. Maids noticed water stains and dust. They did not notice microfractures in limestone. She kept her eyes on the floor and braced for the question she knew was coming. He asked none. He simply said, "Continue," and walked on. That evening, a small book appeared on the side table in the anteroom where she stored her cleaning supplies. It was not addressed to anyone. There was no note. It was simply there, in a place it had not been before. She picked it up and read the spine. Advanced Principles of Structural Masonry in Northern Architecture. She stood holding it in both hands for a long moment. Then she put it in the front pocket of her apron and said nothing to anyone. Over the following 2 weeks, she began to understand that the Duke of Ashenvale watched everything the way other people breathed. It was not performative. It was simply how he operated. He moved through his environment with the constant low-level alertness of a man who had spent years in situations where failing to notice something could end his life. She caught him watching her twice. Both times, he did not look away. She was the one who looked away, because it was what she was supposed to do, and because the alternative required a kind of courage she was not sure she should exercise. He began to speak to her occasionally when their paths crossed. Never personal questions. Always practical ones. Did she notice the draft from the east window indicating a seal failure in the frame? What was her opinion on the staff rotation schedule Lady Dorn had implemented for the winter? Had she read the survey report on the Northern Territories that he had left on his secondary desk? This last one had arrived folded under a candle holder. She had read it in 4 hours and placed it back exactly where she found it. She was aware that these were tests. She was also aware that she was passing them. What she was not aware of was how precisely he was paying attention. On a Tuesday morning in the 4th week of her assignment to his wing, she arrived to find the door to his private study standing open. He was inside. He was seated at his desk, writing, and he did not look up when she appeared in the doorway. She hesitated. Her instructions were to clean his study. His presence was not part of the schedule she had been given, but his open door was not an accident. Nothing this man did was an accident. She entered quietly and began at the far end of the room. They were in the same room for 40 minutes. He wrote. She cleaned. The only sounds were the scratch of his pen and the soft movements of her work. Then he said, without looking up, "What did you do before you came here?" She kept her cloth moving in the same slow circles. "I managed a small household in Mirren, my lord. After my mother died." "What kind of household?" "A modest one. 3 rooms. I kept the accounts and the supply inventory. I also took in sewing work to cover the costs." "For how long?" 3 years. From 12 to 15. Then I applied for placement here." He set his pen down. She heard it, the small precise click of it against the desk. She did not stop working. "Who taught you to read?" he said. "My mother, my lord. She was educated beyond what people expected of a seamstress. She believed it mattered. And the languages." She paused for just a fraction of a second. Long enough for him to notice. She found her voice and kept it even. "I have a facility for patterns, my lord. Languages follow patterns." It came easily. "Which languages?" She considered the cost of honesty and decided it was lower than the cost of being caught in a calculated vagueness. "Ashnik, which is my birth tongue. Northern Varan dialect. Old Court script. And enough of the border trader language to follow a negotiation." He was quiet. Then he said, "That is 4 languages." "Yes, my lord." Another silence. "And what do you do with them here?" "In this palace. Cleaning floors." She let herself look at him then, because the question deserved a real answer and she was tired, suddenly, of hiding behind the obvious one. "I survive, my lord." He held her gaze for a long time. His face did not change. But something behind his gray eyes did, a small quiet shift like a door opening an inch. He picked up his pen. "Leave the north shelf today," he said. "I am expecting a delivery of documents and there will be no room for dusting." "Yes, my lord." She went back to work. She did not look at him again. But she was aware, with the careful animal awareness she had cultivated for years, that he did not go back to writing for quite some time. The weight of what he knows. The letter arrived from the capital 3 weeks into the winter season. Elara did not read it. She was not the kind of person who read other people's correspondence, regardless of what her natural curiosity might encourage. But she saw the seal, and she saw the Duke's reaction to it, because she happened to be present when his manservant delivered it just as she was finishing the corridor outside his study, and she saw the way his entire frame went still. Not tense. Still. The way a river goes still just before it freezes. She left before he noticed her. But she carried the image of his stillness through the rest of her day. That evening, she was summoned. Not by Lady Dorn. Not by the head steward. By the Duke himself, through a formal written note delivered to her room in the lower servants' quarters by a palace page who looked as surprised to be carrying it as she was to receive it. The note said only, "Come to the East Study at 7 this evening." It was signed with his initial, a single precise V. She sat on her narrow bed and read it twice. Then she put on her cleanest gray uniform and went. He was standing when she arrived, which surprised her. She had assumed she would find him at his desk. Instead, he was at the window, looking out at the palace grounds in the dark, his hands clasped behind his back in the military posture she had learned was his natural resting state. He turned when she entered. His gaze moved over her once in the same way it always did, that quick economical assessment that took in everything and revealed nothing. "Close the door," he said. She did. He crossed to his desk and lifted a single document. He held it out to her. She hesitated only a moment before she crossed the room and took it. She read it. It was a military intelligence report. Northern Border Intelligence, specifically. Written in Old Court script with a secondary layer of notation in Northern Varan dialect, the kind of layered encoding used for sensitive communication during active campaigns. She read it in 4 minutes. She could have done it faster. She chose not to, because she was also translating the subtext, which was considerably more interesting than the surface. She looked up. His eyes were on her face. "Tell me what it says," he said. She folded the document along its original crease. "It is a report from your senior intelligence officer in the Northern Border Post," she said. On the surface it describes routine patrol activity and a minor supply dispute with the local settlements. But the secondary notation in Varan dialect codes a different message. There is a traitor inside the palace. Someone in a position close to you has been passing movement information to the border faction your campaign was meant to suppress. The intelligence officer does not know who. But he has identified a pattern in the timing of the information leaks that suggests the source is someone who has access to your private schedule. The room was very quiet. She set the document back on his desk. He said, "How many people in this palace could have read that document the way you just read it?" She considered the honest answer. "Perhaps 3 or 4. 2 of them are your senior advisors. One is Lady Dorn, whose mother was a court translator. And then there is whatever I am, my lord." He was still watching her. The silver in his eyes had an edge to it that she felt along the back of her neck. "And what are you?" She looked at him steadily. "A maid, my lord. As far as anyone here is concerned. But not as far as you are concerned." She did not answer. She did not need to. They were past the point where deflection would serve either of them. She held his gaze. The daughter of a seamstress named Wren, who was born Wren Darras of the old Darras household, which was a minor noble house in the northern district that was formally dissolved when she was 17 after her father's debts consumed everything that remained of it. My mother left with nothing but her education and the family seal, which she removed from its ring before leaving and carried in her pocket until she died. She gave it to me. I have worn it under my collar for 3 years. She reached up and unhooked the fine chain at her neck. She held the small wax seal on its chain toward him. He took it. He examined it. His expression did not change, but she saw his thumb press against the engraved crest. He knew the Darras name. She had guessed he would. The old northern noble houses were his territory, historically and militarily. He held the seal for a long moment. Then he set it carefully on the desk between them. "You have been living as a servant," he said. "When you are, technically, of minor nobility. Dissolved nobility. Which means nothing. Which means less than nothing. I have no resources, no connections, no standing. I had a choice between honest work and dishonest alternatives. I chose honest work." He was quiet again. Then, unexpectedly, something that was almost not quite a movement crossed the corner of his mouth. "Most people," he said, "would have chosen a different category of dishonest alternative than hiding a noble seal under a servant's collar. Most people," she said carefully, "have not had to think very carefully about what they actually need to survive." He looked at her for a long, measured moment. Then he said, "I need someone who can read that kind of intelligence document. I have a traitor in my inner circle and I do not yet know who it is. I cannot use my advisors to investigate without alerting the traitor. I need someone invisible." He paused. "You are, as far as this palace is concerned, invisible." She said nothing for a moment. Then she said, "You want me to spy for you. I want you to listen, and notice, and tell me what you observe. Which, from what I have seen, you are already doing naturally. And if I decline, He tilted his head very slightly. You could decline. You could walk out of this room and go back to your corridor and your cloth and your pail and nothing would follow you. I do not coerce servants. She believed him. Which was itself a significant piece of information. She looked at the seal on the desk between them. Her mother's seal. Everything that remained of a name that had meant something, once. She picked it up and put it back around her neck. Tell me, she said, what you already know about the traitor. And so he did. They talked for 2 hours. It was not the conversation she had expected. He was precise and organized in the way he shared information, giving her what she needed without embellishment, reading her comprehension and adjusting his pace accordingly. He treated her, she realized slowly, the way he would treat an intelligent colleague. Not a subordinate. Not a curiosity. A person with a mind he found useful. She was not sure what to do with that. She had never quite had it before. When the palace clock struck 9, she stood to leave. He said, "You will continue your duties exactly as before. Nothing changes in how the staff sees you. If anyone asks why you spend more time in my wing, Lady Dorn has already been informed that your work is satisfactory and your rotation will remain extended for the season. You spoke to Lady Dorn before you spoke to me." He met her eyes. "I had to ensure the cover first." "Yes." She processed this. "That means you decided to trust me before you knew whether I could be trusted." Something in his expression shifted again, that same interior movement she had noticed before that had no name she could put to it. "I decided to trust my assessment," he said. "Which is not the same thing." She nodded once and crossed to the door. She opened it and then paused, because there was something she had to say and there would be no graceful way to say it later. "My lord." He was already back at his desk. He looked up. "I would like to know," she said, "what you will do with what you have learned about me tonight. About my name. My mother's house." He held her gaze. "Nothing," he said. "What you have shared stays in this room. You have my word." She considered the weight of a word from a man who was famous, above all else, for never breaking one. She nodded, and left. She walked back to the lower servants' quarters through the cold dark corridors and kept her face perfectly still the entire way. She did not let herself think about his eyes. Not yet. Share this with someone tonight. Like and subscribe if this story is pulling you in. What obsession looks like in silence. She found the traitor in 11 days. She had not planned to do it so quickly. She had thought it would take weeks. But the advantage of being truly invisible was that people did not edit themselves in front of her, and the advantage of 3 years of learning the palace's rhythms was that she knew exactly what was wrong when she saw it. The traitor was Lord Fane, the Duke's second military advisor. A man of 45 with impeccable credentials and a smile like polished silver who had been in service to the Ashenvale household for 12 years. She identified him through 3 things. First, She noticed that the small private schedule the Duke kept in his East Wing study, which she alone cleaned, was accessed at night. She knew this because she placed a single hair, one of her own, across the bottom hinge of the desk drawer where it was kept. The hair was disturbed on the third night. Second, she noticed that Lord Fane had developed a recent habit of walking the East Corridor past 9 in the evening, which he had not done in the 3 months she had been tracking staff movement. He walked it precisely 40 minutes after the Duke's personal candle in his study window went dark. Third, she noticed that Lord Fane had a small smudge of dark ink on the inside of his left ring finger, in exactly the position produced by writing in a very small, compact hand, the kind used for coded short messages. She observed these 3 things. She connected them. She wrote a single-page summary in Old Court script and left it on the Duke's desk at 6 in the morning. By noon, Lord Fane was under quiet arrest. She was cleaning the high windows in the corridor when the Duke came to find her. She heard his footsteps first, the particular cadence of them that she had memorized without deciding to, the slightly longer stride on the left, a remnant of an old campaign injury she had deduced from the way he favored that leg on cold mornings. She kept working. He stopped beside her. She could feel him standing there. He had a particular quality of stillness that occupied space in a way she found, against every practical instinct, difficult to ignore. "You found him," he said. "Yes, my lord." "In 11 days." "Yes." "My own intelligence division had been looking for 3 months." She said nothing. The statement did not seem to require a response. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "I want to increase your involvement. There is a second matter, related to the border faction, that I have not yet shared with you." She set her cloth down and looked at him. He met her eyes steadily. She had learned, over the weeks of this strange and unnamed arrangement, to read the small things his face did. The slight compression at the corner of his mouth that meant he was controlling something. The almost imperceptible narrowing at the outer edge of his eyes when he was deciding. The particular quality of attention he gave things he considered important. He was giving her that last quality now. She became aware, not for the first time, that she was being watched in a way that had nothing to do with intelligence or utility. There was something else layered beneath the practical observations, something that a more experienced woman might have identified sooner. She filed it away and kept her expression neutral. "Tell me about the second matter," she said. The second matter was more serious than Lord Fane. There was a document, he told her. A treaty agreement from 30 years ago between the Ashenvale Duchy and the northern border settlements, one that had never been formally registered with the Crown because it contained concessions the previous Duke, his father, had made without authority. If that document was discovered by the capital, it would not only invalidate the Ashenvale territorial claims in the north but create grounds for the Crown to dissolve the duchy altogether. Someone was looking for it. Not the border faction. Someone inside the capital. He believed he knew who. He did not share the name with her yet. He was still building his case. What he needed her to do was find the document first. He believed it was somewhere in the palace, hidden by his father before his death, in a location only someone who knew the palace intimately could find. Elara listened to all of this with her hands folded in front of her and her face attentive and still. When he finished, she said, "I have already found 2 hidden passages in this palace that are not on the official architectural records. One of them leads to a sealed room beneath the east wing." He went very still in the way she had come to associate with his most significant reactions. "Show me," he said. The hidden passage was behind the 3rd panel of the East Corridor linen room, which was technically Elara's domain and which no one of rank had entered in years. The panel opened when you pressed the lower left corner at an angle, which she had discovered by accident one morning 6 months ago and had told no one. She pressed it now, with the Duke standing directly behind her. The panel swung inward. The air that came out was cold and smelled of old paper and something that might have been wax seals. She took the candle she had brought and stepped in. He followed. The passage was narrow, the ceiling low enough that he had to angle his head slightly. She was aware of him behind her in a way that required genuine effort to set aside. He moved in silence. She could hear him breathing, slow and even, the controlled breath of a man who had learned to manage his body's responses regardless of circumstances. She focused on the floor and the walls and the path ahead. The sealed room was 30 paces in. The door was iron, not wood. The lock was old but intact. She held the candle up and examined the lock. She said, "The mechanism is a northern design. 3 tumblers with an internal pin. It can be opened without the key if you have something thin enough for the secondary groove." She reached into the small kit she kept in her apron pocket. She kept it because certain cleaning tools required fine picks for the decorative metalwork that could not be removed for cleaning. She had never used them for anything else. She was aware that using them now, in front of him, was another exposure. She did it anyway. The lock turned in under 2 minutes. She pushed the door open. The room beyond was small. Shelves along 2 walls. Boxes and sealed cases. A single trunk in the center, iron-bound, with a wax seal on the latch that had been pressed with the Ashenvale crest. The Duke crossed the room in 3 strides and crouched before the trunk. He studied the seal for a moment. His father's seal. His voice was quiet. "Yes," she said. He looked up at her. In the candlelight, the silver of his eyes was warmer, the way winter light looks through amber glass. She was standing very close to him, closer than she had ever stood, the dimensions of the room requiring it. He said, "How long have you known this room was here?" 6 months. "And you told no one?" She met his eyes. "It was not my room to tell anyone about." A long pause. He stood. He was tall enough in the small room that the closeness of the ceiling brought him even nearer to her, and she held very still and kept her breathing even and looked at the wall just past his shoulder. He said, quietly, "You are remarkable." She was not prepared for that. She had prepared for many things. Not that. She said nothing. He did not say anything further either. He simply looked at her for a moment with that same quality of attention that she had been carefully not examining for weeks. Then he turned to the trunk. He broke the wax seal cleanly and opened it. The document was there. Exactly as he had described. 30 years old, its edges brown, its writing faded but legible, bearing his father's signature and the countersignature of the Northern Settlement elder. He lifted it with both hands. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. She stood beside him in the small dark room and held the candle steady and did not speak either. After a while, he said, without looking at her, "I am going to need you to stop being a maid." She blinked. "What do you mean?" He looked at her then. His face was as controlled as always, but she had learned to read the space between what his face showed and what his eyes held, and in that space she saw something she recognized, because she had been carrying something that felt like it in her own chest for weeks without allowing herself to name it. "I mean," he said, "that I am going to formally petition the Crown to restore the Darris name. Your mother's house. Minor. But real. Which will make you, technically, a noble." She stared at him. "Which will make it considerably less complicated," he said, "to invite you to advise me formally. As a court advisor. Not as a servant." She was very quiet for a moment. Then she said, "And is that the only reason you want to stop me from being a maid?" He held her gaze. His expression did not change. But that space between his face and his eyes opened a little wider. "No," he said. "It is not." The candle flame wavered between them in the enclosed air. She looked at the document in his hands. She looked at the iron trunk. She looked at the shelf of boxes that represented decades of a man's private history kept hidden in a sealed room beneath a palace that had kept its own secrets. She thought about her mother, who had carried a seal in her pocket and called it enough. She thought about 3 years of gray uniforms and cold corridors and learning to make herself small. She looked at him. "You should know," she said, "that I do not do anything by halves. If I advise you, I will say what I actually think. If I disagree with you, I will tell you. I will not be managed or maneuvered or used as a comfortable presence. I am not built for that." He said, after a moment, "I know. I am also not particularly comfortable with sentiment expressed through policy decisions and document petitions," she said. He said, "What would be more comfortable?" She looked at him steadily. "Honesty," she said. "Direct and plainly stated. Whatever that looks like for a man who has spent his entire life communicating in code." Something that was not quite a smile moved across his face. It was small and brief and completely genuine, and she was quite certain she was the first person in a very long time who had put it there. He said, "I have been watching you for 6 weeks and every conversation we have is the most interesting thing that happens to me on any given day. I do not want you to leave this wing. I do not want you to disappear back into the corridors. I find your mind extraordinary, and I find, somewhat inconveniently, that the rest of you is not insignificant either. I am not certain what to do about any of that in a way that does not compromise your position or my judgment, but I am working on it. Is that direct enough? She thought about it. It is a reasonable start, she said. He looked at her. And something in the way he looked settled into place, like a lock finally finding its key. Good, he said. What survives the light? The petition to restore the Darris name took 3 weeks to reach the capital and 7 more days to receive a formal response. In that time, nothing changed publicly. Elara continued to wear her gray uniform. She continued to clean his wing. She continued to appear in the corridors before dawn with her cloth and pail, invisible to the rest of the palace, present in her own skin in a way she had not been in years. Things did change in the private hours of the East Wing. He began leaving books on her supply table with a frequency that had abandoned any pretense of being accidental. Histories, military treaties, philosophy texts in old court script that she could read and he wanted discussed. She began leaving her margin notes folded inside the covers when she returned them, brief and plain-spoken, and she would find his responses written in the same margins in his economical hand. They had conversations that began in his study and moved through the palace grounds when the evening was quiet enough to walk without notice, she in her gray uniform and he in his plain dark coat, speaking about northern history and the architecture of power and what loyalty actually cost when you examined it without sentiment. He asked her opinion on things and then actually listened to it. She had no experience with this. She had learned to be useful and invisible and to manage her own counsel, because counsel offered freely to people who did not value it was simply exposure. Being listened to was something she was still learning what to do with. She noticed, in the private careful way she noticed everything, that he never spoke at her. He spoke toward her, the way a person speaks toward someone they believe is capable of catching what they throw. She noticed that he watched her when he thought she could not see him, and that when she caught him at it he did not look away first. She noticed that the quality of his attention had shifted from the forensic assessment of a man identifying a useful resource into something more personal and less controlled. She noticed that she was not doing anything to discourage any of it. The capital's response to the Darris petition arrived on a Thursday morning. The royal secretary's office acknowledged the petition and noted that the restoration of dissolved minor noble houses required a formal review and the sponsorship of a duke or higher. The Duke of Ashenvale's sponsorship was noted and the petition was accepted for review. It would take another 3 months to process. In the meantime, the letter noted, the petitioned individual could be granted provisional status as a household member of the Ashenvale court, which would allow her to be recognized by rank-appropriate title within the duchy itself, pending the Crown's formal decision. Lady Dorn delivered the news to Elara in the linen room with the same carefully neutral expression she used for everything. "Your duties in this capacity will conclude at the end of this week," she said. "The Duke's office will communicate your new assignment directly." "Yes, Lady Dorn." The older woman paused at the door. "You were the best maid I have had in 15 years, she said finally. Do not tell anyone I said so. She left. Ilara stood alone in the linen room one more time and looked at the shelves of folded cloth and the cleaning supplies she had organized carefully enough that any maid could navigate them without instruction. She thought about her mother, carrying a seal in her pocket and a name no one could take and a belief that it mattered. She thought about 12-year-old Ilara managing accounts in a 3-room house in Miran. She thought about how quietly and steadily a person could build something out of very little, if they were patient enough. She put on her cleanest gray uniform for the last time and went to find the Duke. She found him in the East Garden, which was barely a garden at all in winter, just bare stone paths and dormant rose bushes and the cold clean smell of frost. He was standing at the far end with his hands behind his back, looking at nothing in particular. She walked to him without announcement. He turned before she reached him. He always heard her coming. She had given up wondering how. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the garden. I received the capital's response this morning, he said. As did I. 3 months for the formal restoration. Yes. He was quiet. The winter air was sharp and clean and the palace walls rose pale and enormous around the small bare garden. He said, there is a complication. She waited. The person in the capital who was searching for my father's document, he said. I have identified them. It is a member of the King's Advisory Council. A man who has, for the past several years, been quietly building a case to bring down the Ashenvale Duchy on the grounds that my father's original land grants were obtained through irregular means. He has been working with someone inside this palace, not Lord Fane, someone I have not yet identified. He paused. And he is aware that I have been looking for him. Which means he is now looking at everyone close to me. Including my new court advisor, whose petition for noble restoration he will be able to access in the Capital Review files within the week. She understood. She had understood halfway through. You are telling me I may be in danger. He looked at her directly. Yes. She processed this. Then she said, what do you need from me? He blinked. It was the smallest reaction, a fraction of a second, but she caught it because she caught everything. You are not going to argue, he said. About what? About the danger. She looked at him steadily. I have been in danger before, my lord. I have been poor and alone and dependent on the goodwill of people who had no particular reason to extend it. This is a different kind of danger and it has different solutions. The question is what those solutions are. So I am asking what you need from me. He was very still for a moment. He said, I need you to trust me. And I need to tell you something that I have not said to anyone in a very long time. She waited. He said, I am not very good at this. Whatever this is becoming. I have spent my life building competence at things I can control and treating everything else as a variable to be managed, and I find that I cannot manage this as a variable and I am not certain I want to. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, you are significantly better at this than you think you are. He looked at her. That quality in the space behind his eyes had stopped being a door opened an inch. It was fully open now, all of it, and what she saw there was steady and considered and entirely real. She said, "Tell me how to help you with the council member. Tell me what you have built so far. We will solve the problem and then we can figure out the rest." A pause. He said, "There is no one like you." She looked away at the bare stone paths of the winter garden. Her throat was tight in a way she was not quite prepared for. She said, quietly, "I know. There is not." She heard him almost laugh. It was a small sound and it was genuine, and she felt it the same way she felt the first morning light on cold stone, something warm arriving in a place that had been cold a long time. They spent 4 hours on the East study going through everything he had assembled on the council member. His name was Lord Veth. He was 61, meticulous, and had no obvious weaknesses that a standard investigation could find. Elara found 3 in the documents he had provided, none of them obvious, all of them significant. Lord Veth had a secondary account maintained through a border trade house that appeared in the financial margin notes of one of the supply ledgers she had processed as part of her cleaning duties. She had noticed the account number 6 weeks ago without knowing what it was. She knew now. The account corresponded to a name. The name corresponded to a merchant with documented ties to the border faction the Duke's campaign had suppressed. The merchant was not a mystery figure. He was already in the Duke's intelligence files as a person of interest. The thread, once pulled, unraveled everything. They built the case together over those 4 hours. She wrote an old court script and he cross-referenced against his own files, and they built a chain of evidence that was clean and complete and would hold under any formal review. When they finished, the candles had burned low and the room was quiet. He looked at what they had assembled. He said, "This is enough." "Yes," she said. He looked at her across the desk. He said, "When this is over. When Veth has been formally presented to the King's Council and the Ashenvale Duchy is secured and your name is restored. I want to have a different conversation." She met his eyes. She knew what conversation he meant. She had been having the early edges of it in her own head for weeks. She said, "I want that too." He nodded once. Then he straightened, because he was always and essentially a man of sequence and process, and said, "I will send the evidence to the capital in the morning. The King's Council review will take 2 weeks at minimum." "Then we wait," she said. "Then we wait." The 2 weeks that followed were the strangest of Elara's life. She was no longer a maid and not yet formally anything else. She moved through the palace in a kind of in-between state, still wearing practical dark clothes because she had nothing else and because she was not, by nature, someone who required ceremony to feel real. He gave her an office. A small one adjoining the East study, with shelves and a desk and a view of the pale winter garden. She filled it with the books she had borrowed without permission from the palace library over 3 years and returned without credit. The first time she sat at her own desk in her own office with her mother's seal around her neck and a candle at her elbow and a document she was reading for herself and no one else, she sat for a moment without doing anything. Then she opened the document and began to read. The capital's formal response arrived on a cold clear morning exactly 18 days after the evidence against Lord Veth had been dispatched. Lord Veth had been removed from the King's Advisory Council pending investigation. His assets were frozen. The case against the Ashenvale Duchy had been closed on the grounds that the document used to initiate it had been obtained through irregular means. The Ashenvale Duchy was formally secured. 3 days later, a separate document arrived confirming the restoration of the Darris name. Elara read it in her small office while the Duke stood in the doorway. She read it all the way through. Then she set it carefully on her desk. She looked at him. He crossed the room. He sat in the chair across from her desk, the way he had sat across from her in the East Study on the night they first talked for 2 hours about a traitor and found themselves talking about something else entirely. He said, "You wanted honesty. Direct and plainly stated." She said, "Yes." He said, "I have been alone a very long time." "Not lonely, exactly. I am not built for loneliness in the ordinary way. But alone in the specific way of never having someone you can speak to without calculating first what they will do with what you say. I stopped expecting to find that. I had decided it was not something I was likely to encounter." He paused. "And then I came through the palace gate on a November morning and there was a girl on her knees scrubbing the floor and she did not look up, and something about the way she moved told me she was carrying something that the floor did not deserve." Elara sat very still. He said, "I do not know how to do this with any elegance. I know how to plan campaigns and manage estates and hold a duchy together when everyone around me has a private agenda. I am aware that those skills do not translate particularly well." She said, "They translate better than you think." He looked at her. She said, "I have never once in my life had someone see me calculate and not try to use it. You watched me see through your encoded document and your response was to hand me harder ones. I have never had someone leave books because they wanted to know what I thought about them. I have never had someone petition a crown office because they wanted me to be able to sit at a desk instead of kneel on a floor. These are not nothing." His face did something she had not seen before. Not quite the almost smile. Something deeper than that. Something that had been underneath the controlled surface the whole time and had simply never had a reason to come up. He said, "I am going to court you properly. With whatever that looks like when one person is a duke and the other person is newly restored minor nobility and they have already spent 2 months solving intelligence problems together in secret passages." She almost laughed. She caught it and held it in her chest where it became something warmer. She said, "I think it looks however we decide it looks." He nodded. He stood. He came around the desk. He stood close to her in a way she had learned to be very still around. He reached out and, with a care that was entirely characteristic of everything she now knew about him, took her hand. He turned it over. He pressed his thumb against the small crescent scar on the inside of her left wrist. He said, "I noticed this first." She said, "I know." He said, "I am glad I looked." She looked at their hands. His warm and certain. Hers steady in a way she had earned. She said, "So am I." She had come to this palace with nothing. No name that counted. No family. No claim on anything beyond the work of her own hands and the sharpness of her own mind. She had made herself invisible because it was the only armor she had. She had not planned on someone choosing to look through armor. She had not planned on it meaning what it meant when he did. Outside the small office window, the winter garden was still bare and pale and cold. But somewhere at the edge of the stone paths, one of the dormant rose bushes had put out a single small bud. She did not mention it. But she noticed it. She always noticed everything. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. If this story moved you, please subscribe, leave a comment about your favorite moment, like the video, and share it with someone who loves a beautiful royal romance. More stories are coming. I will see you in the next one.